Last year, I matched with a guy on Tinder. His profile seemed normal enough, with smiling pictures with friends, a few selfies, and a bio that read, "Just looking to meet new people, into hiking, movies, and dogs." We'll call him Mark. After a few days of chatting, he suggested we meet up for a casual coffee date at a cafe downtown. Nothing fancy, just a quick meet and greet to see if we clicked in person. When I showed up at the cafe, he was already there, sitting at a corner table with a coffee in hand. He looked just like his pictures, which was a relief. He was polite, even charming, and our conversation flowed easily. But then, halfway through the date, he started asking some strange questions. It started small. He asked about my family, which is normal, but then he kept pressing for details. How many siblings I had, if I lived close to them, and if they knew I was out on this date. I brushed it off, telling myself he was just being conversational, but I could feel something off in the way he asked. As we wrapped up, he insisted on walking me to my car. I politely declined, but he kept pushing, saying it was just the gentlemanly thing to do. Eventually, I agreed, figuring it would be easier than making a scene in public. We walked to my car, and he didn't say much on the way. When we got there, he stood a little too close and asked if he could come back to my place to keep hanging out. I laughed it off, making up an excuse about having work early the next morning. He seemed disappointed, but eventually nodded and let me leave. The next day, I got a text from him, asking when we could see each other again. I ignored it, realizing I just wasn't interested. He kept messaging me over the next few days, each one getting a little more intense. The text went from, "Hey, are you free this weekend?" to, "I really thought we had something special," and eventually, "Why are you ignoring me? Don't you think that's rude?" And after a week of no responses, he sent one last message that said, "You can't ignore me forever." I blocked him, thinking that would be the end of it. A few nights later, around midnight, I was lying in bed when I heard a faint scratching sound on my window. I lived on the ground floor of my apartment building, so it wasn't unusual to hear noises outside. But this was too deliberate, too persistent. My stomach dropped and I crept over to the window, lifting a corner of the blinds just enough to peek outside. There, in the faint glow of the streetlight, was Mark, crouched right outside my window, looking directly at me. His face was blank, almost like he was just waiting. I let the blinds fall and stumbled back, my heart pounding. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator what was happening. She stayed on the line, telling me to lock myself in a room until the police arrived. I bolted to the bathroom, locking the door behind me, and tried to keep quiet. I could still hear the faint scratching outside. It felt like hours before I heard the police banging on my door. They searched the area but did not find him. They told me to keep an eye out, but it did not feel like enough. Over the next few weeks, I noticed little things out of place. My doormat was shifted, as if someone had been standing there. One night I found scratches on my window frame, fresh enough that they hadn't had time to rust. I bought extra locks, changed my routine, did everything I could to feel safer, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Months passed without any sign of him. I started to relax, telling myself maybe he'd moved on. But every once in a while I'd get a text from an unknown number. Messages that said things like, "I still think about you," and "One day we'll finish our date." I moved across town a month ago, hoping that would finally end it. Just last week, though, I got a package at my new address with no return label. Inside was a single item, a key, scratched up and rusty, with a tag that read, "See you soon." I don't know what the key is to or what its relevance is, but I'm absolutely terrified now. I'll never forget the day I was my best friend Kevin's getaway driver. It was supposed to be a casual Friday, a break from the routine, but things spiraled fast. The day started with Kevin texting me about his date with some girl he met on Tinder. "I'm going in with low expectations," he joked. Turns out, even that was optimistic. The first red flag, he let her pick him up. I told him that was a bad idea. How are you supposed to bail if things get sketchy? But he laughed it off, said he'd be fine. About 20 minutes after she picked him up, I got a text. "Dude, she doesn't look anything like her profile picture." He sent a follow-up message describing her, and she sounded like a completely different person, down to the hair color and even her voice. Not even close to what he expected. Their first stop was at some diner near the theater. Kevin texted me about halfway through. "She keeps trying to kiss me, but it's like she's trying to swallow my face." He said every kiss felt like he was getting punched in the teeth. He tried to ease back and told her he wanted to take things slow, but she did not seem to care. By the time they finished eating, Kevin looked like he was already over it, and I could tell he was considering making up an excuse to leave, but he did not want to be rude. Next, they hit up a movie. During the entire film, she was trying to pull his attention away from the screen, huffing every time he looked forward instead of at her. Kevin texted during the movie, "I think she's actually mad at me for watching the movie." He planned to call it a night right after, but she started saying they should go to a bar where some of her friends were going to hang out. He hesitated, but she kept pushing. On the way to the bar, he shot me a message. "I need out, man. Can you come to the bar and help?" And I was already out that night, so I agreed. I headed over, parked by the bar, and left the back door of my car unlocked. I did not know how crazy it was about to get. I waited for what felt like forever, scrolling through my phone, keeping an eye on the entrance. Then, finally, Kevin burst out, running full tilt. He practically dove into the back seat, slammed the door, and breathlessly told me to drive. So I hit the gas. That's when I saw her. She was already outside, storming toward us with this look on her face like she was ready to murder someone. And just as I thought we escaped, she jumped into her own car, peeled out of the lot, and started following us. My heart was racing as I swerved through back roads, trying to lose her. I did not know if she had friends in her car, but she definitely had this frantic, unhinged look when she spotted us. We managed to get onto the highway, and I gunned it, praying she'd finally back off. And eventually she fell behind and took an exit. Kevin and I took another and looped around the outskirts of town, sticking to side streets until we were sure she was gone. Only once we were completely out of sight did we finally breathe again. And it was getting dark, and we laid low in a parking lot, trying to calm down. And that's when Kevin's phone buzzed. He showed me the messages. First, it was a string of threats. Things like, "You don't know who you're messing with," and "I know people who can find you." Then, suddenly, she switched tones and said things like, "Sorry, babe, I didn't mean to scare you. Let's just talk." And it kept going back and forth like that. One second she was sweet, and the next she was borderline unhinged. By then, Kevin was seriously freaked out, and the texts were only getting creepier. Good thing he had told her to pick him up at a shopping center instead of his house. She did not know where he lived, so he had at least that bit of privacy. Still, he stopped dating for a while after that. I don't blame him. No one wants a repeat of a psycho chase. It was supposed to be a normal Tinder date, but it turned into something out of a horror movie. To this day, I always warn my friends, don't let anyone pick you up, especially if it's a first date. And if things feel off, get out as soon as you can. I met him on Tinder. His profile was straightforward. Pictures were nice, cute, clean cut, seemed normal. We chatted for a few days, nothing deep, just enough to see if he was decent. When he suggested grabbing a coffee, I thought, why not? It was a public place, and he seemed polite, so I felt safe. We met up at a small coffee shop around 6 p.m. He looked just like his photos, which was a relief. Coffee went fine, Casual conversation, no red flags. After an hour or so, he suggested we go grab a drink. I hesitated but thought, what's one more hour? So here's where I made my first mistake. He didn't know exactly where to go in the area, and I stupidly offered to drive with him from my friend's place nearby, actually my apartment. I thought the friend's place line would give me some distance, just in case, but it was still my address, and I basically shown him where I lived. I locked my door, gave him the friend's place story, and hopped in his car. We drove across town to this bar that he mentioned, and once we sat down, things started to shift. Right away, he leaned in way too close, his hand resting on the back of my chair, fingers lightly brushing my neck. I stiffened a bit, but tried not to let it show. I figured maybe he was just a bit touchy, overly friendly, but it was uncomfortable. His fingers lingered, tracing small circles along the base of my neck. My gut tensed, but I brushed it off. I did not want to be rude. When the bill came, he made zero attempt to even look at it. I pulled out my card, hoping he might at least offer to split, but he just smiled as I paid. Not a word. That should have been my cue to leave, but somehow I just did not want to create a scene. Excusing myself to the bathroom, I texted a guy friend, explaining the situation. How do I politely bail? I asked him. He told me to claim an early morning, say I need to be up early. It seemed reasonable enough. As I was walking back to the table, my phone buzzed. One of my girlfriends had texted, checking in on how the date was going. While still near the bathroom, I quickly typed out a reply. This is torture. I'm in hell. How do I get out of here? I then threw my phone into my purse, took a deep breath, and headed back out with a smile, ready to cut the night short. When I got back to the table, he gave me a strange look, almost like he'd caught me in a lie. My stomach sank. I glanced at my phone in my purse, and dread hit me like a wave. I did not text my girlfriend. I sent it to him. For a second, I thought about bolting, but he was right there, staring at me. I stammered an apology, making up some excuse about a bad day. I even blamed myself, saying I'd been a little off all night. He did not respond, just sat there with this slight smile, like he knew he had me trapped. I asked if I could just call a ride, insisting he did not need to take me back. But he wouldn't hear it. Said he would drive me, make sure I got home safe. I forced a laugh, hoping he'd see the humor in it, maybe lighten the mood, but he didn't. He just gestured toward the door and guided me back to his car. The ride back was excruciating. Every time I tried to apologize, he'd say, "It's fine, don't worry about it." But his voice was tight, his fingers gripping the steering wheel a little too hard. I kept my eyes on the road, feeling his gaze flicker toward me every now and then. The silence was heavy, like I was waiting for something to snap. When we finally pulled up, I mumbled a thank you, reaching for the door handle as fast as I could. But he leaned in, asking, "Just one kiss goodnight?" I managed a stiff smile, dodging his lips with an awkward hug, saying something about being tired. He watched me unlock the door, did not leave until I was safely inside. I closed the door, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs. Before I could even collect myself, my phone buzzed. "Thanks for tonight. When are we doing this again?" The next day he messaged me twice, asking about another date. I blocked him and double-checked my locks. Since then, I've been extra careful about who I meet, and I never, ever invite them near my place. I still feel that creeping unease when I think of his eyes in that car, that calm stare that saw right through my excuses. It was like he knew exactly what he was doing, and that I couldn't do a thing to stop it. Hey, what's up guys? It's Spooky. If you've made it this far, congratulations, you survived. If you did not know, I have an Instagram. Follow me on there so we can connect. And I also have a Patreon. On there you'll have direct access to me and can see the upcoming videos, polls and soon-to-be exclusive stories only shared on there. If that's something that interests you, please consider joining. That's all I have for you guys tonight. Stay spooky, and I'll see you in the next video.